And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, March 9th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, NIH sets up camp near one of the worst environmental disasters ever. Plus, U.S. organizations should prepare for potential retaliation in the cyber domain as tensions with Iran escalate. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Army is overhauling its direct commissioning program as it tries to bring more civilian tech experts into uniform. Service officials say the program will completely upskill Army organizations over time. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more details. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
Hey, before we dig into the details of this initiative, just summarize for folks the direct commissioning program. How is it different?
Yeah, so basically, this initiative allows qualified, highly skilled civilians to become commissioned officers without going or attending the traditional officer school. And this program allows them to enter at ranks from second lieutenant to colonel, and that would depend on their qualifications.
Why has it been so hard for the Army to manage this program in the past?
So direct commissions have long been used by the military to bring in specialized experts that they can easily train internally. During World War II, for example, direct commissions were used to bring in thousands of civilians into the military, so civilians like engineers, lawyers, medical professionals, etc. But most recently, Congress expanded direct commissioning authorities in fiscal 2019 to allow services to bring in hard-to-fill experts directly into active duty and reserve officer roles, and that would be for fields like cyber and space, just to name a few. But the process has long been bogged down in bureaucracy. For the Army specifically, getting through medical screenings, security checks, and all the other administrative steps, it could take as long as 18 months. Candidates would just drop out before even completing the process or just simply not apply. And the numbers reflected that. So over the years, outside of specialties like law or medicine, the Army would bring under 50 direct commission officers each year.
So what are they going to do differently now to try to tackle the problem?
Yeah, one of the biggest changes that they've implemented was centralizing the process under U.S. Army Recruiting Command, which now handles applicant screening, waivers, and application tracking. One of those changes that really made a difference is pre-screening candidates early in the process. And all of those changes have allowed the Army to go from what used to be an 18-month process to 6 months. Here's Lieutenant Colonel William Lincoln, Chief Officer in the Army's Accessions Policy Branch.
One of the biggest changes is just how we process and centralize. Let's kind of reinforce that centralizing the effort under U.S. Army Recruiting Command. So where the Army used to spend a lot of time recruiting, assessing, screening, training, a lot of talent was being lost in a lot of people wanting to serve, but as we screened them, they weren't eligible to serve. And so we were finding talent. We invest a lot into bringing that talent on board, only to find that they weren't eligible to serve, kind of screening them later in the process. Centralizing this effort, we have one command under T2COM and USAREC where all training and all sessions kind of feeds into. We've revamped the Direct Commission webpage. Go Army webpage has been updated. So we've centralized the effort. And a lot of communication and marketing is all driving to the recruiting command so that AI capability and exquisite technology, all that's being screened. If you want to serve, we're going to screen you first to see if you're eligible to serve and then bring you on.
Anastasia, the Army's had this capacity, this opportunity for decades. What pushed them to overhaul the system now?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So the first one was that the Army saw the very low number of officers that it was bringing in through the program. There were also a lot of lessons learned through the services initiative called Detachment 201. Last year, the Army commissioned senior executives from tech companies like Palantir, OpenAI, Meta, into the Army Reserve to serve as sort of advisors. And Army officials told reporters that this effort made them take a closer look at the bureaucratic hurdles that surrounded the program. Here's General Gregory Johnson, Director of Military Personnel Management.
I think we learned a ton from how we assess the Det 201 officers. And it allowed us to really look at, I'll just use the broad term, it allowed us to look at our bureaucracy. It was taking pre-Det 201 accessions probably about 18 months to bring an officer direct commission into the Army. 18 months. Many folks that were interested in serving, the 18 months process to go through medical screens, security screens, some training, etc., was just really too long for most of those folks interested to stick through the process. We had our team internal that was doing direct commission really take a hard look on how do you break those barriers down.
Anastasia, the normal paths to commissioning are Officer Candidate School, ROTC, and West Point. How is this direct commissioning program going to fit in with folks who go through those normal paths?
So the way the Army sees it is they want to have a lot more mid-career civilians with specialized technical skills like AI, robotics, and networking to come in and kind of build the service's capabilities that it's pushing under the Army Continuous Transformation Initiative. So they want to use this process to bring in more experts, given the broader modernization effort that the Army is undergoing. Here's General Johnson again.
The Det 201 folks are tech CEOs, they're high-level individuals with a lot of experience. In this case, the direct commissioning program, we're really focused on coming in at the lieutenant and the captain level to help us in the technical areas in our operational units. And we have a lot of movement here from a software perspective, from an AI perspective, robotics, networking. There's many emerging fields and capabilities that we're building into the Army under continuous transformation. And we believe that folks can help us through this direct commissioning program.
Do you think if the Army gets this right, that it might expand to the other branches?
I think right now they're really targeting this tech skills like AI and cyber. But the way they're talking about it is that the program will really allow the Army to upskill all the organizations. So we'll see what comes out of it. But they also just overhauled the process. We don't even have the numbers. They promise that they will have the amount of officers that they're going to bring in through the program at the end of the fiscal year. So we'll see what we're dealing with at the end of the fiscal year.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Thanks so much for the story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, U.S. organizations should prepare for potential retaliation in the cyber domain as tensions with Iran escalate. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Experts say the next month could bring disruptive cyber activity from Iran and its aligned groups, and they're urging organizations to shore up defenses now. The concerns center on the likelihood of targeted operations against the sectors with the highest visibility and the weakest points of entry. We'll examine what the threat picture looks like and how leaders can harden their operations quickly with James Turgel, Vice President of Global Cyber Risk at Optiv. Mr. Turgel, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We are hearing a lot about the kinetic aspects of current operations in the Middle East and not so much about the invisible ones, predominantly retaliatory cyber activity that we might be expecting. Put your crystal goggles on and look forward. In the next 30 days or so, what should organizations in the U.S. perhaps realistically expect to see in terms of disruptive attacks from Iran?
Yeah, so the next 30 to 60 days, Terry's really going to be crucial, and you're going to start to see a ramp up of activities by both Iran and their proxies in the Middle East. So businesses, Terry, they don't care how big you are, how small you are, right? This is about creating chaos. This is about disruption. So dedicated denial of service attacks, website defacings. This is a fear campaign from Iran's standpoint. It's basically trying to reach out and say, look, we can get you from 10,000 miles away. We can attack your websites. We can attack your companies. So it's about a psychological impact, certainly more than a kinetic one.
Do you think it's predominantly an effort to disrupt operations, or is it an influence campaign, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, so there will be both, right? So there will be certain organizations, the proxies out there, around the Middle East that are sympathetic to, Iran. Those will be more disruption. Those will be chaos. Those will be attacking to not necessarily. You won't see really any type of ransomware attacks. These are specifically designed to create damage, right? So instead of going to the extent of ransoming data, right, they'll just wipe it. So there's ransomware, but there's also something called wiperware, right, where they'll infiltrate a system and it will literally just wipe every bit of data out of it. So these are more destructive campaigns. They're not designed for money. And you will see, again, doesn't matter how big or small you are, it's all about the disruption.
You talk about impact, visibility, and accessibility when it comes to cyber ops. Are there U.S. sectors that you think are most likely to be targeted now?
Yeah, absolutely. So any kind of critical infrastructure, so energy, water, wastewater, transportation, logistics. So most of you look at the history of Iranian, cyber operations, they're very much into the operational technology side. Yes, they have operations that'll hit, back office IT systems, but they usually focus on those type of, SCADA or operational technology, OT systems. And it's kind of, unfortunately, it's low hanging fruit for them. You get small municipal, water treatment facilities and, small municipal counties or cities that don't have a big cyber budget. They probably have one or two IT guys at best. They don't spend a lot of money on it. And so their cyber hygiene, the number of tools, their cyber ecosystem is just not as advanced or mature as, let's say, financial services sector is. And so that's why they attack those organizations. But I mean, let's face it, right? Water treatment facilities, water systems, right? That's critical to everyday lives.
So that's a high impact space. Let's go back to that data wiper piece for a minute, because you highlight healthcare systems, the financial system. What are the threats there?
So from a healthcare standpoint, they realize, right, that healthcare is one of those critical sectors that's so important. And so having a high impact, if they can advance their techniques to attack a healthcare system, right, their whole ability here, or their whole design or background here, is to inflict as much damage as possible, right? So that's why they're using wiperware and probably not ransomware, right? They want to inflict as much fear and as much damage from a cyber ecosystem standpoint as they can.
I'm speaking with James Turgle. He's VP of Global Cyber Risk at Optiv. Let's switch a little bit. You mentioned proxies, but Iran also has sort of, I'm using my air quotes here, partners in terms of China and Russia. What sort of practice or partnership does that look like when it comes to cyber?
So certainly from a nation state standpoint, Russia is certainly more pro-Iran from a cyber logistics standpoint. So yes, you're going to see some Russian-backed state-aligned operatives that are kind of operating independently from Iran. There's a number of them out there. We've also got a lot of pro-Russian hacktivist groups. So you'll see both the nation state, right, the Russian SVR, right, their intelligence service that runs a lot of their cyber campaigns, right. You'll see attacks from them, but you'll also see some pro-Russian hacktivists get involved in this as well. Right, they are right now. There's some reporting out there about them attacking, the Israelis' Iron Dome and going after, certain organizations within the Israeli government, but also they're now expanding it to like the Gulf states. Right, again, trying to inflict as much damage as possible from a cyber aspect.
We're only about a week into this operation. The U.S. government certainly hinted that we had offensive cyber capabilities in the Venezuelan operation. Are you seeing any demonstration of us attacking using our offensive cyber capabilities to ward off this kind of counterattack?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to see there are offensive cyber command. U.S. Cyber Command is utilizing offensive capabilities against Iran right now. But you also have, this is kind of twofold. So you'll have Cyber Command doing the offensive piece in theater, right, from a cyber aspect. You also see, right, NSA and the FBI, right, who are in a defensive posture, right, inside the U.S. and the NSA outside the U.S., looking for what are those signatures, what are those either, certainly Iran focused, but the proxies, the Russian proxies. So you'll see defense on two fronts, and then you'll see the offense by Cyber Command, right, going directly at Iran. And there's also some reporting out there that Israeli Defense Forces actually bombed the headquarters of the cyber headquarters of the IRGC, which may have an impact on their cyber capability. But again, that's from inside the country. And I think the bigger threat here is from proxies outside the country.
And as our kinetic impact grows and we disable their conventional weapon systems, what might you expect in terms of escalation on the cyber front?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So let's face it, the Iran military is no match for ours, from a kinetic standpoint. And so the only way that they can gain traction here will be in cyberspace, right? So I also would not discount I also worked counterterrorism when I was in the FBI. You can't discount the aspect of a potential sleeper cell, some type of IRGC organization or cell in the Middle East. I think there was just an arrest in Bahrain or UAE of 10 members that they thought were engaging in potential sabotage or counterterrorism aspects. I don't see that likely here in the U.S., but certainly the FBI is all over that, and something that we should think about. But you're going to see these other theaters of action, right? Cyber, and more so cyber, and then the other areas as well.
So for leaders who are trying to harden their organizations quickly in light of this situation as you've just described it, what are the most important steps they should insist on, say, in the next 72 hours to increase the resilience of their own operations?
Yeah, Terry, this is, certainly everybody should be up on their cyber acuity, their cyber hygiene. But right, we're now in crunch time, right? We're in the middle of a war. So this is about incident response and resilience, right? So you need to, every organization out there needs to go find their incident response plan, specifically their cyber incident response plan, right? Dust that thing off, right? And let's keep it on the desk and start to go through it, right? How are we looking at our ability to defend a DDoS attack? How are we, the ability for us to kind of harden identity issues? If you are an organization that has both operational technology and information technology, right, those two systems, right, you need to make sure that you're hardening those as much as possible. But this is about incident response. This is about resilience, and this is about making sure that you're ready for it, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
And making sure you've posted all the latest patches, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's kind of table stakes, right? You need to be patching everything, when those vulnerabilities come up, and you would hope that certainly that they're up on their patching strategy. But if you're not, and you've put, a company has put that off, you need to do it absolutely right now, because the threat actors out there, certainly the Iranians and even the Russian proxies, have the ability to scan the internet for devices that have known vulnerabilities. And that's just easy. It happens every day. They have AI bots that do it for them now.
I've been speaking with James Turgle. He's VP of Global Cyber Risk at Optiv. Mr. Turgle, really appreciate you joining me today, and thank you for this clear-eyed assessment.
Thanks, Terry. Love being with you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, a stalled DHS funding fight at home and rising tensions abroad are pushing Congress into another week of high-stakes maneuvering. But first, NIH sets up camp near one of the worst environmental disasters ever. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. 3 years after a freight train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, residents are still worried about the health risks from the controlled burns that sent toxins into the air. Now the National Institutes of Health has set up a new research office on the ground to monitor those impacts. Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with the person running that effort, Dr. Ashlyn Quinn, to find out how it's going.
So East Palestine, I remembered it happening in the news, but it was quite a while ago, and it was a pretty big deal. That burn went on for what felt like ever, and now NIH is actually implementing a research office there to study the effects of what occurred and everything like that. Why don't we just take the 1,000-foot view and step back a little bit on what actually happened and how you found yourself in this position?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So you're right. It was February 3rd, 2023, when that train went through East Palestine, Ohio, and derailed. So it's been 3 years, but I think it's still pretty vivid in a lot of our memories, the images of the train derailment and then what happened afterward, which is not only that, these train cars that were holding hazardous chemicals derailed and spilled, but then also some days after that, the decision was made to actually do a burn of some of the hazardous materials that were in the train cars. So you might remember seeing in the news those big plumes of smoke that were over the community. And, it was a small village, but an inhabited community in East Palestine, Ohio, about 5,000 residents right in that village, and then many others that were affected, of course, in the region because of the smoke that carried over those areas and the chemicals that were spilled into the environment.
So you've now established a health research office in East Palestine, and how did the decision get made to do that? And, was this something that you all had been monitoring already, I imagine?
That's right. Yeah, it actually was. So, you can imagine shortly after the spill, the government got involved, and there were many different federal agencies that arrived on scene, both to do the cleanup and then specifically from the NIH perspective where I sit, we were interested in collecting data and researching, what could be the impacts on the community's health, since that was of utmost concern to folks. So actually starting back in 2023, we had a number of efforts going on. There was a workshop that was convened with the community and also a lot of federal partners to kind of think about what are the major risks here, what do we need to do. And one of the things that we launched as a result were 6 small research projects. We call them R21s. They're like 2-year research projects. And so we awarded those to groups to really collect environmental data and start tracking health outcomes in the community. But we always knew, right, that the 2-year period wasn't going to be long enough to really track all the health outcomes for the affected community members. And so last year in 2025, we were really excited to get the green light to launch a larger health research program. And this is going to be a 5-year effort to continue to track the health concerns of the affected community members in East Palestine, Western Pennsylvania, and other affected communities. So the East Palestine Health Research Office had its ribbon cutting just on the 3rd year anniversary, February 3rd, 2026. And that office is going to be kind of central location in downtown East Palestine that will be kind of like the heart or the hub of the research program that's going to be happening there. So it's a place where community members can go in, they can sign up to be part of the study. They can also get help from research staff on things like filling out study instruments and that sort of thing.
Which of the long-term health effects will you all be looking at or looking for? And, is 5 years even going to be enough? These are talking about long-term health effects that could occur and pop up at any times in folks' lives. I don't want you to speculate or anything like that, but, what are you looking at on the forefront?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, you're absolutely right. 5 years isn't the end point of this work, hopefully. It's just kind of like where we are now. And in terms of what health outcomes we're looking at, so this is an effort that's actually really in collaboration with community. So the research program is led by a consortium of researchers that are at the University of Kentucky, the University of Pittsburgh, and Yale University. But they are working and have been working with the impacted communities to identify priority health outcomes and concerns. And at this point, we really want to be trying to track all the different concerns that the community might have in terms of their health. So as of now, the researchers are going to be focusing on the liver and the liver-related outcomes, also the liver-thyroid axis, mental and behavioral health, respiratory health, cardiovascular health, cancer-related outcomes, and children's health. But as new concerns arise, the structure of this program is such that the researchers can continue to respond to priority health issues faced by the residents of the area.
We're speaking with Dr. Ashlyn Quinn. She is with the Population Health Branch at the National Institutes of Health's National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And that title alone means you have some experience in environmental health itself. This is really unprecedented what occurred. How do you narrow down exactly what you should be looking for? Just because, as you mentioned, it was a real hodgepodge of chemicals that had to be burned.
You're absolutely right, Eric. There were many chemicals, and we don't, to this day exactly know what the health outcomes that are going to arise are. So the approach we're taking is really to track symptoms in the affected community and see what comes of it. But that said, we do, from the NIH perspective and, where I sit at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, we have a lot of experience working on, unfortunately, other disasters of this type. And you can think of, the Gulf oil spill or the World Trade Center disaster, Gulf War veterans, so we actually do have a lot of experience to date of research that's been conducted with hazardous chemicals and mixtures of those. So, some of the health outcomes that we're looking at are based on the evidence that we have for, how things like ammonium chloride and these volatile organic compounds that were released in East Palestine could be associated with future health concerns.
Yeah, I won't hold you to the fire and make you tell me which is worse, a burn pit or environmental burn, but that's another topic for another day, unfortunately. And in doing this, let's get down to the actual research itself. The participants it's all voluntary. When something like this occurs, there is a hesitancy for some folks to join in just because you don't want to be, it's a small town. You don't want to be the only thing you're known for. This person could be potentially, ill or have somebody think that way about them. How do you balance that while also trying to get people to show up just because you're there to help?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, unfortunately, I feel like everyone who lives in East Palestine is already marked by this disaster, for better or for worse. Luckily, the partners that are working in this area have been, working with community groups for some time, really, ever since the disaster and even before. Right? So there are really strong community relationships already established, and that's been really helpful, I think, in getting community members on board. We also, because this is a community engaged research project, throughout it, we're going to be interacting with the community. And by we, I mostly mean the research teams that are there, although NIH is going to come as often as we can as well. But for example, at the ribbon cutting, there wasn't just the kind of big fanfare, ribbon cutting for the office, but there were also in conjunction several community listening sessions. And those were held in East Palestine and also in Pennsylvania for community members who might have been affected to share their views, both of, what do you think of this research project? What do you think the priorities should be? So, throughout the project, there's going to be that level of community engagement, and we're hoping that really helps build trust and transparency with the community.
And preparing potentially for what will, there are probably going to be other disasters of this sort. What do you do on the ground to, react to what's happening, but also use it for future lessons in what you would probably categorize as the next environmental disaster?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we hope that there's going to be a lot of lessons learned from this effort, but particularly about how to remain accountable to impacted communities. We don't want the research to be separated from the community concerns, and we'd like this to be a model moving forward for how community concerns can be integrated into research priorities. So, just to give communities a voice in driving research that affects them directly.
Well, most important part, we do have a pretty wide footprint here all over the country. If a member or if a listener is listening from East Palestine or used to live there or maybe feels like they could have been affected, how can they get involved in participating in any of your studies?
Yeah, great question. And we'd love for, more folks to get involved. And, so the research is recruiting from the East Palestine area for sure, but also Western Pennsylvania. And then we're also recruiting from Cambridge, Ohio, which is a little bit outside of where the disaster occurred, but those participants will be really helpful in kind of a control participant sense. We also want to get data from them. So if you are listening and you're part of one of those communities, I certainly hope that you'll sign up to participate. I think the best way to find the information is probably on the internet. If you just Google UKY, which is for University of Kentucky. They're the lead academic institution. So UKY and East Palestine Health Research Program, that will get you to a website where you can sign up. If you happen to be in East Palestine itself, and you can also visit our research office at the Way Station, which is in downtown East Palestine, to sign up for the study.
Dr. Aisling Quinn is with NIH's National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. We'll also post a link to give some folks more information, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, a stalled DHS funding fight at home and rising tensions abroad are pushing Congress into another week of high-stakes maneuvering. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Leadership changes sparked by DHS Secretary Noem's departure and Oklahoma Senator Mullen's potential role have stirred new political drama, but provided no path forward on the Department of Homeland Security's funding freeze. Add to that a Congress increasingly split over war powers resolutions and the path to any Middle East supplemental, and the next few months look like anything but predictable. We'll connect the political and procedural dots with Mitchell Miller, Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.
As it seems every time we talk, there is no shortage of news. So let's start with the big bombshell that hit last week, the departure of Kristi Noem as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and the president's intention to nominate Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullen as her replacement. What did you hear as the immediate impact of that on the Hill?
I think there was a sense of relief, frankly, among Republicans because many of them felt that Kristi Noem was just kind of hanging on. And those two dates of the congressional panels that she spoke to were circled a long time ago because a lot of people thought those were going to be pivotal, and they certainly did prove to be that. There was just no question that she was going to face all kinds of scrutiny. So when the president eventually weighed in and said that he was not happy with her whole discussion about this $200+ million ad campaign that featured her prominently, that was really the end of it. So when we move on to Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullen, he says he's excited about getting the job potentially. He obviously has to be approved and confirmed by the Senate. It does look like that Democrats are going to vote against him. That's not really that surprising. They say basically that they do not feel that the Department of Homeland Security has been changed from within, that it was really just a personnel decision at the top, not to say that they're not happy about it. But Markwayne Mullen is going to have a lot of work ahead, as you know, in connection with trying to get all these disparate issues in connection with ICE, border protection, and just basically get the confidence again from many people, at least on Capitol Hill, related to the Department of Homeland Security. So I think that he will get through on confirmation. In fact, he said he got texted by Democratic Senator of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, with congratulations right after the announcement. So, you know, there will be some grumbling about this by Democrats, but I think Markwayne Mullen is probably set to head the Department of Homeland Security.
Does this help advance compromise around funding for DHS? They're still stuck in partial shutdown mode.
You know, I thought that it actually would, but I put that very question to Maryland Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey, and he said, no, not really, at least for him. And I think that feeling is shared by the Democratic leadership as well. They say that you're just taking the head of this agency and you're not fundamentally changing it from within. So they are holding firm. They are saying that they still want these reforms with ICE. They are still talking about the fact, and in fact, last week they tried to parse out parts of DHS that we've talked about before. They tried to offer up legislation where they would just vote to approve funding for FEMA, for the Coast Guard, for TSA, and the Republicans didn't want any part of that. They, of course, brought up the old DHS budget bills for votes in the Senate and the House. In the House, it passed again. It did not move forward in the Senate. So essentially, we're back to Groundhog Day with this partial government shutdown continuing, and with the House out all of this week and the Senate not seeming to budge, it looks like it's going to continue.
Well, we're coming up on that important date when TSA members start missing a paycheck. So do you think that will advance the conversation?
I do. There's no doubt about it. I think members of both parties really think that that is going to be the pivotal thing here to move the needle and try to get some kind of shakeup. That when you start to hear about TSA workers not showing up for work, calling in sick, the heightened talk about not getting paid, and the fact that we're going to be moving into the spring travel season, that I think is finally going to jostle things. But, exactly what date that will take place, we'll have to see.
Well, speaking of jostling things, of course, we also had the major news last week that we began wartime operations in the Middle East. Where are the fault lines around that conversation on the Hill?
That is really fascinating. Of course, we had the War Powers resolution in the Senate from Virginia Senator Tim Kaine that failed to move forward. There was also a bipartisan War Powers resolution in the House that also fell short. But what is interesting is a lot of Republicans, even though they are not saying so publicly, are frankly pretty nervous about what is happening. When you have literally 11 countries that have in one way or another been involved in this war in the Middle East, there's some real concern about what is going to happen moving forward. And Republicans, at least at the leadership level right now, are standing very strong behind the president and say that this needs to be done. We've, of course, seen some various shifting explanations about how it is going to why it has taken place, whether it's primarily military, whether it's regime change. The latter is what really makes a lot of the Republicans a little bit more nervous when we find out about whether or not, for example, they're going to have to need a lot more money to pay for all of this. So there's definitely some nervousness here on Capitol Hill.
I'm speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, let's talk about that money. Typically, whenever we begin this kind of an operation, there is a request for supplemental funding for the Department of Defense. We've heard some conversation about that. What are you hearing?
Right. I spoke about this with Virginia Senator Mark Warner, who's the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, and he says certainly they will look at a supplemental funding package. They've been talking about tens of billions of dollars. One figure that's been floated is $50 billion. Democrats point out that the Defense Department was already given a pretty hefty increase under the Big Beautiful Bill, so there's some reticence on the Democratic side. And then on the Republican side, you're going to have fiscal hawks who are saying, well, wait a second, if we're going to approve this money in a supplemental, we're going to want to see some offsets somewhere else. And so there's some concern there. What Senator Warner said, at least from his standpoint, is kind of getting back to this issue of what is the end game. He says that's going to be really the critical matter, I think, for a lot of lawmakers, Republican or Democrat. What is exactly the plan? And he said if that is not clarified, at least in his view, in a better way, that a lot of lawmakers will be reticent to approve a lot of this money.
Well, that will be a tricky conversation. And I want to go back to something you mentioned a little earlier, the nervousness amongst Republicans. Let's put that in context by talking about last week's congressional primaries across the country. How did that play out?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there was a lot of attention obviously related to Texas, and some of the things that you can pull out from some of those high-profile races. One was the first incumbent to lose in a primary was Dan Crenshaw, a Texas Republican. He lost in a race against a candidate backed by Ted Cruz. So that is an indicator to some that, well, wait a second, maybe some of these incumbents might be in trouble. And then you have the huge race in the Republicans on the Republican side in the Senate between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, the Attorney General in Texas, and Cornyn, the longtime Republican senator. And the fact that the president now is starting to put his finger on the scale because there are a lot of Republicans concerned that the GOP will just burn through a ton of cash if this primary between Cornyn and Paxton, which is now in a runoff, continues to move forward. And then on the Democratic side, you had James Tallarico beating Jasmine Crockett, much more liberal candidate in Texas. The Democrats feel fairly good about that, but we've heard for decades, really, that Democrats always feel that they have the energy to topple a Republican senator. That is going to be a real uphill battle. So overall, I would say if we step back, right now, the House map still looks very good for Democrats to retake the House, especially when you have all these pressures related to the war with Iran, the fact that the gas prices are going up, a lot of issues are moving, at least in the early polling, toward Democrats. On the other hand, in the Senate, Republicans, I think it's still a stretch for Democrats to say that they are going to retake the Senate. There's a lot of things related to the map related to the Senate where it's still to the advantage of the GOP.
And all this matters because the margins for each party are so tight in both chambers.
Right. It's incredible. When you think about it, it's really one or two votes that make or break any legislation now in the House of Representatives. So all of these races are just incredibly important. You can't just say, well, okay, it's one of 435 seats. All of these have such high stakes, and that's why you see, for example, this back and forth that we've talked about with the redistricting. And right now, the early voting is underway in Virginia with this referendum to try to get, at least on the Democratic side, all of these districts changed in Virginia so that it would give a huge advantage to Democrats. Right now, the split is 6-5, and it could go as high as 10-1, depending on whether this referendum is passed, and then it moves on to getting approved later on in the year. So, and that's just Virginia. As we know, that's happening in many states across the country.
Mitchell, we're talking about a lot of pressures that sort of are all coming together to impact a legislative agenda. There was news on Friday, the federal jobs report for February. The economy lost 92,000 jobs in February. December's numbers were revised down, and the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.4%. So when you think about the affordability message there, the war message, the tight margins, what kind of legislative work might you think could actually move forward?
Well, yeah, that certainly puts a lot of pressure, particularly on Republicans, since they have control of the Senate and the House. And that's why this week you are going to see Republicans trying to roll out a lot of different ideas. They have a retreat this week where they're basically trying to react to the fact that the jobs figures are not looking good, the fact that gas prices are going up, that affordability continues to be the top issue in all of the polls that come through. So that's why there's a lot of talk among House Republicans about a reconciliation bill, bringing out another big piece of legislation, basically 2.0, that they could get passed later this year. The problem is they don't really have a set idea of what is actually going to be in it. So you have some proverbial spaghetti on the wall ideas where you just have a lot of lawmakers throwing everything but the kitchen sink out there, trying to figure out what can we do to help Americans and make things more affordable. Among the many ideas is, for example, a tax credit for first-time home buyers. So you're going to see those kind of proposals, I think. But on the other hand, there are many Republicans who are concerned that if they do bring about another reconciliation bill, because those margins that you just mentioned are so tight, what if they fail? What does that do going into the midterms if they show that even though they're in power, that they can't get another piece of legislation passed? So there's really a lot at stake coming up here in the next few weeks.
I've been speaking with Mitchell Miller. He's Capitol Hill correspondent for WTOP. Mitchell, thanks for helping us make sense of what is a crazy time up there.
You bet. I hope I'm making sense.
Definitely helpful. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Federal cybersecurity leaders say they're looking to artificial intelligence to help thwart cyber adversaries who are increasingly using AI themselves. Garun Lacey is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Cyber and Technology within the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. And Joseph Aguayo is the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. They talked with Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Lacey speaks first.
For us as state and the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, our mission is protect the people, the property, and foreign policy activity for the federal government. We've incorporated AI into that strategy to really take a look at that river or ocean, if you will, of data. How do you turn those zeros and ones into actionable protective data for that mission set? For us, AI aggregates fragmented signals from across federated spaces, and it compresses time down for us, the time from signal to decision to action, so that we can free up those people. The technology and the tools don't protect the activity that people do. So AI buys those people time. And in our space, some of the most aggressive cyber environments on the planet, that time, that human capital, equates to resiliency for us.
And Joe, I want to go out to you here. I know PNNL is working on some really interesting stuff in this space. So, floor is yours. How is AI factoring into what you're doing with cybersecurity?
Yeah, so Pacific Northwest National Lab is a federally funded research and development center under the Department of Energy. So we live at kind of the unique intersection of basic scientific research on one hand, but then it's applied to like the tightly controlled domains of national security and protecting the energy grid. Specifically for AI and cybersecurity, so we kind of split that into three focus areas. So you have sort of the AI for cyber defense and blue team activities, AI sort of for the red team side and adversary emulation, and then platform security, so protecting the AI systems themselves.
Got it.
I think one thing really want to highlight is the kind of threat intelligence piece of it. So it allows you to consume a large breadth of information, but then also translate that to threat hunting activities where you really focus in and do a detailed deep dive on specific topics. So it kind of lets you pivot between breadth and depth very smoothly.
Yeah, if I could stick with you, Joe, I know PNNL is one of many labs looking at this, and you guys have come out with some generative AI capabilities to actually simulate cyber attacks that might happen to an organization. And I'm wondering just if you can describe how that whole experimentation is going and what you've found works so far in that space.
For sure, yeah. Well, the commercial AI models definitely focus on writing code very well. So any type of task where you can reduce it down to, generating code is going to be pretty successful. For the research effort, what they're doing is using the AI models and then training them up and augmenting the kind of commercial packages with additional knowledge about red team activities and adversarial emulation. And then they're running tests to see how that performs. And you can kind of split that into two pieces. On the one hand, you have the AI generates an attack plan, and you have a human in the loop that kind of supervises and controls it. Or you could go with a fully agentic approach where it just, cuts loose and has automation and the authority to take action itself. So definitely there's some open research areas there in terms of if you're a defender of production networks, you don't necessarily want to cut the agentic AI loose until you kind of do that full testing and have human in the loop and have supervision and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting research area that's kind of expanding and ongoing.
Yeah, well, that leads really well into my next question to the panel, which is some of the key challenges with leveraging AI to assist these cybersecurity operations. Obviously, we know you can't slap AI onto anything and just have it work well. So in the cybersecurity space, what are some of the key challenges you're working with? Gerton, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think we all know what AI is it's an amplifier of your foundation, right? So if your foundation isn't solid, then any type of emergent technology, AI included, is going to be disruptive. So one of the key challenges, let's be honest, federal space is messy when it comes to data, normalization, standardization, and what have you. So clean data, governance that scales at the speed of technology, and disciplined processes need to be in place first before you deploy any type of emergent tech. If it's not there, then the challenge is you're going to amplify disruption instead of productivity. Just think about what it looks like if you have false positives or hallucinations at machine speed are going to equal chaos at human speed. And it really, really presses upon the need to make sure your foundation is secure.
Yeah. And as far as clean data, federated data, those discipline governance processes, any early solutions or headway made there in terms of bringing that together to do this?
From our standpoint, what we've done is we've actually taken the concept and the excitement around AI and used it as a driver to really focus in on our foundation. Make sure that we've got asset inventory in place, right? Make sure that we've got normalized our data and logging, taking a look at the things that all incident responders struggle with. Right? You mentioned earlier having automation and triage to really provide that decision support component from the AI as opposed to letting the AI do all of the decision making for us. And I think that's where some of that low-hanging fruit comes in, really empowering the folk. We do a real good job at hiring really smart, really driven, mission-focused people. So when we look to deploy AI as a strategy for decision support and as a driver and incentive to really focus in on fundamentals, that's where we're seeing the most success.
That's Gerton Lacey, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Cyber and Technology within the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security, along with Joseph Aguayo, the Deputy Chief Information Officer, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. That's an excerpt from a conversation with Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. To hear the full discussion, go to federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.